Alrighty, time for our fiscal focus segment, as always brought to you by InfoChoice, your choice of information on Australian consumer finance. Now, with house prices throughout the country continuing their seemingly unrelenting journey upwards, would-be buyers are perhaps starting to lower their expectations about what they can realistically afford. Many of us dream of that perfect Aussie home, 4-bed, 2-bath and a backyard large enough to play cricket in. But those seeking a home in our major cities face having to give up that dream and settle for something smaller like an apartment or a townhouse. Meanwhile, some, particularly among younger generations, are keeping the dream alive by leaning on family for assistance. Joining us to discuss that and more is Rebecca Jarrett-Dalton from Two Red Shoes Mortgage Brokers. G'day, Rebecca. Welcome back to the Savings Tip Jar.
Hello, thanks so much for having me back again.
Great, thanks for joining us. So just the first question I have for you, are you seeing a rise in joint application home loans between family members, and why do you think that is?
Absolutely, we are. There's a couple of different reasons, and it depends on the demographic as to what that a reason aligns with most. So younger generations, we're seeing people join up, group up, brothers, siblings, very close friends to buy a better property than they could buy on their own, or even to buy a property when they perhaps couldn't qualify on their own at all, because affordability is so tough, right? We're also seeing the next, shall we say, what we'd think of as our upsizers, so our late 30s, early 40s, they're joining up with family. They might be buying a house with a granny flat, and then that's built-in babysitting. So it's helping mum and dad out. Mum and dad can release some of their money. I'm thinking of my sister-in-law right now. Her mum and dad have done exactly this. They've built a granny flat at her place, and they're just traveling the world. But when they're home, that's building babysitters, which means that really busy lifestyle that we all have right now has got a bit of ease and support. So that's working well.
Sounds like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, right. They're loving it. The other demographic is, in fact, the multi-generational living. So again, it's the family living in a property, but it's a cultural thing. So it's more aligned with what traditionally they would have done, or supporting the grandparents like they more traditionally would have done. So we're seeing a lot of that.
I guess that's kind of what such as those in the RBA have actually been encouraging. I remember Phil Lowe, when he was governor, really going on about how the household size shrank through COVID and how we probably need people to move back in together now to get their household size back up, because that really constrained the supply of vacant properties with people just wanting to live on their own, or just with a couple moving out of a share house. So I guess, encouraging people to move back in, perhaps that's the way to go. That's one way to curtail the housing supply crisis to some extent. But I'm curious, why opt for buying a home with a family? Like, why do that instead of, say, going down the guarantor route? That's where you can probably qualify for the loan without actually having to buy the home with family, but they're just sort of sitting there as a guarantor if you fail to make your repayments.
So it's less about the actual guarantee. It's less about actually having the equity to buy the property. It's more about the affordability, being able to buy. So I'm thinking of another couple or a family, I should say, where they've actually bought a really large property on acreage, gives everybody the space that they want, but they couldn't do it on their own. And each party is winning in that arrangement. So it's less about actually supporting the purchase on a guarantee kind of perspective or an equity perspective. It's much more about the actual income. And then, as I say, freeing up some generational wealth to go and do some other things. One set of rates, the power bill is pretty much the same for a family of 4 as it is for 6, the grandparents sneaking in, all that sort of stuff. It does overall reduce a lot of the costs.
There's a lot of hysteria in the media now about housing affordability, and for good reason as well. But I'm kind of curious to get your take on if this is just Australia maturing as a property market. We see in Japan or in Europe or in South America, for example, it's actually pretty common for homes to be passed down through generations, or you have the grandparents live with you or whatever. Whether that's for affordability or just like cultural reasons. Can you see this happening in Australia? And I know we grumble about the in-laws a lot, but can you see that happening?
Yeah, and I've been worried about it for like literally a decade. I've been saying this is something we will get to a point, in my opinion, where if your family has owned property, you'll own property. And if your family has not owned property, then you never will. But that leaves us with a great big shortage in rental property as well, right? Because we've got a massive rental crisis. So we've got problems on all the sort of angles at this stage. And of course, moving in with family is not all smooth sailing either. We make jokes about it and say, but what happens? What happens if, something happens to mum, God forbid, but what happens, something happens to mum and dad moves in his fancy new woman and now you've got to make cocktails for her. Like, how do you like this? So we raise all those potential challenges up front, go and deal with it, address it, get some legal advice, get some advice about how to exit if everything is going well, but life has changed and you want to move to Queensland and they don't. How to exit if everything is going badly, and also what to do, in the unfortunate time your parents aren't here any longer and your siblings are now coming around and wanting you out of your home so they can have a share of their inheritance. It's not without its problems, but it's certainly, look, as you say, I think it is a growing trend for a lot of reasons, and I do think we are going to move a lot more down that line, and particularly in the inner cities. Unless we can decentralise, this is where it's going to be.
Yeah, definitely a few risks to consider before buying with family, as you've mentioned. What about the backyard stuff? Is it right for people to say to younger generations that are hoping to buy in the near future that they should just give up the idea of having a backyard? Is that just an unfortunate reality of living in a growing city?
That's harsh. We're not saying you have to. We're saying that you might consider it. But you know what? And yeah, look, it's much tougher, obviously, to get a full-blown house than it is a townhouse or a villa or a unit. But in fact, it suits a lot of people as well. A lot of people are really time poor, like we discussed earlier. So for them, not having to maintain is also an attractive attribute. And I think we go through cycles. So when you're really young, you don't want that big backyard. You want to be able to live life and enjoy yourself. Then you have kids and then they grow and then suddenly you do want a bit more space, and then the cycle continues, the kids move out and you want to move in with them and you don't want the backyard anymore. So it's a constantly moving feast.
Absolutely. And just before we move into the sort of lending side of things, you haven't personally seen anyone's father who's moved in the new girlfriend, have they?
I really don't want to close that.
That's all right. No comment.
Story has a solid basis.
That's all right. I can imagine that there's a non-zero chance that that's happened. So we'll just move.
Imagine the alternative, right? Imagine you move in with your brother and the sister-in-law that you didn't really love, and now brother's gone, she's got a new man, and you're living with someone completely unrelated. Like, these things have happened. So
yeah, and for you as a mortgage broker, you have to arrange that on the lending side of things, I suppose. And, it's fraught with danger. You got to dot your I's and cross your T's if you're going to consider living with family, especially some blended sort of families with different relationships going on. But yeah, we'll talk about the lending side of things. Now, last time you appeared on our podcast in November 2022, we were very green to podcasting, and a bit's changed since then in home lending and with the RBA and all that good stuff. And you said that was right at the peak of the surge in refinancing, and we were about to experience the so-called mortgage cliff. Long story short, how'd that pan out for you and your clients?
Like more of a hillock than a cliff. Lots of people obviously came off those really low rates, and then obviously they rolled to something that's potentially 3 times what they were paying before. So it was tough. Lots and lots of negotiating with existing lenders to get their interest rates brought back into line. But essentially, touch wood, everybody's been okay so far. I don't think we're as flush. I think we've used up a lot of our savings. So if I was to anecdotally kind of say, I think we ran out of money about Christmas time last year and we're skating. I think people are doing it tough. But in terms of the mortgage cliff, it wasn't quite as dramatic as it was, and thank goodness for that. Absolutely, thank goodness for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were actually expecting a tsunami. I think we put out some media analysis and infographics of a tsunami of fixed rate loans expiring, and it was just going to wash over the whole market and wipe everyone out. But that didn't quite pan out. And I did have my suspicions that it wouldn't. It was a bit overblown, because we have heard so many of these big cliffs. In the past, I remember there was the and there was the mortgage holiday cliff. All those people that went on mortgage holidays during COVID, that was all going to expire, and defaults left, right, and center. And then there was the that whole collection of interest-free. Oh no, what was it? Interest-only mortgages that were converting to principal and interest. That was going to cause all sorts of issues. Again, didn't really pan out. So, yeah, there's form with media beat-ups here. Now onto something a little bit different. The home guarantee scheme. Now, this has been quite a popular scheme for a lot of first-time buyers who are able to essentially qualify for a mortgage without having to pay for lenders' mortgage insurance, with a really small deposit of 5% or even less, as low as 2% with the single-parent home guarantee scheme. But it looked like in the federal budget there wasn't much detailed information or any sort of sign of commitment going forward with the home guarantee scheme. So I just wanted to know, have you had many, clients, buying homes through the home guarantee scheme, and if it does turn out that this home guarantee scheme is coming to an end, just give us your thoughts on how that would pan out.
I hope that doesn't happen. Yeah, we've absolutely enjoyed this, and it's been a great fast track for people to get in. The biggest challenge is people actually can't find properties to buy. So whilst the scheme is fabulous and the support is fabulous, finding actually a home to buy has been really difficult. I read that 1 in 3 first-home buyers over the last 12 months has actually utilised the scheme, which is phenomenal.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been quite cool. It's a bit of a misnomer. Everyone says you have to have just 5% deposit. Well, you have to have just 5% deposit and enough to cover, if you've got stamp duty to pay, enough to cover your legal fees, registration fees, etc. So there's a little bit of a misnomer there, but it still is a really great scheme. Like I said, the 2% scheme, the same, 2%. And if you're going to have to pay stamp duty, enough for that, and your legal fees, lender fees, etc. That's a fabulous scheme. You not only get no mortgage insurance too, you go into the lowest level of interest rates, which has been great. And we are seeing some of the first ones kind of come off. What's been interesting for me, it's been going for a few years now. The first 2 years, I think it was capped at 10,000 places a year, and they sold out in like 3 months. They were gone. We have 35,000 places now, and that's obviously 3.5 times as many, but we're nearly at the end of the year and we still have spots. That's a good indicator to us as to how difficult it actually is to find a property to buy right now, and also just to qualify. We're still testing interest rates, even with those lower interest rates, you've got to put a 3% buffer on that. So we're testing your affordability at 9.2, 9.3%. That's super tough. So while the scheme is fabulous, we've still got quite a lot of, let's call them handbrakes to actually buying a property.
Yeah, it certainly seems like no matter which corner you turn, you might get the financing, you might get the pre-approval or whatever, but then you can't find a bloody property to buy. Or on the flip side of that, you find your dream property, it's in a fair price, and you're trapped in a mortgage prison. You can't refinance to unlock that equity to buy that property or whatever. But just on that, in the last time you appeared on the pod, there was a real concern that people wouldn't be able to refinance because they technically couldn't afford it. Are you seeing that ease a bit now, or is it still tough? And are brokers really having to try hard to get those better deals across the line?
It's difficult. But the first thing we always do, though, is we go back to the existing lender and ask them for a discount. We press pretty hard, and most often we're successful. But then there still is a cohort that we can't quite get right. Yeah, it's really tough. What has happened in the background is that, like I say, we mentioned the 3% buffer rate. We now have lenders who can allow a lower buffer rate, perhaps 1% on top of your existing repayments, as long as, on top of the proposed interest rate, but as long as your existing repayments are still higher than the proposed repayments via the refinance. Whole heap of criteria that you have to do, but it is still some relief. There still are some borrowers, though, that even can't qualify at that. And we are looking at some lenders that are bringing out some no buffer products that actually mean that you can just, if you're paying it at 9.5%, you can definitely pay it at 6%. No increase to loan, no change to loan term. Everything has to stay the same, but it's common sense. To my mind, I think if you already owe the money and you're paying it, like I say, at the higher interest rate, and you can show affordability, we don't need the prudent buffer there. We absolutely need it if we're going to extend your borrowings. But if you're already owing it, already paying it, kind of a no-brainer.
Now, Rebecca, forecasts are something that is very difficult to do. And we know no one can predict the future. And we know that particularly property market forecasting, the activity of doing so has certainly embarrassed a lot of, so-called experts. But, you're someone who's really, the coalface of everything in the property market. You're dealing with clients who are looking to buy properties. So I feel like you'd have a good feel for what's happening in the market. So without giving exact forecasts on exactly what percentage property prices are going to go up by, what do you see the property market doing over the remainder of this year?
So the constraint is going to be affordability, right? I think there's such a lack of stock. And I've got to say, through COVID, everybody was saying the property market's going to tank. And I'm going, nah, there's no chance because there's no stock, right? So we're still in exactly the same situation. The lack of stock is keeping prices buoyant, but your ability to actually borrow is making life difficult. So things are staying on the market that little bit longer at the moment than they were before, which is a bit of a challenge. It does also indicate, like I say, we want the property to buy, but we just can't get it across the line. So things are going to still keep going up. I think they're going to go up at a slightly more moderate rate. And we need some change. We need something to give so that people, right now, the average family can't afford to buy the average home. And I don't think that's okay. I think that needs to change.
Certainly right. And what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And in this podcast, Rebecca, you've covered a great range of topics. Do you have any final sort of parting words for our listeners whether they're trying to find a mortgage or a property to buy?
Don't give up. Keep trying. Try again. Keep in touch. We're keeping in touch with people every 6 months, and it's funny. Things change that you don't understand could have a really big benefit. We're keeping in touch with people. Hey, we spoke to you 6 months ago. You couldn't do anything. Just checking. Do you want to rehash? Things have changed. We find out that their HEX is gone or their car loan's gone, and suddenly they can buy. Don't give up. Stay in contact. I'm biased. Keep in touch with your local broker and see. Keep saving too.
Wise words indeed, and certainly a great note to finish on there. Rebecca Jarrett-Dalton, really appreciate your time here on the Savings Tip Jar podcast. Thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, and hopefully it's not 18 months again until we speak again.